Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023, week 37, September 11th to September 17th. And we are going to start out by just getting all of my rims back in their boxes and get them ready to get the tires mounted on them. Yeah, I really love the rim choice that I went with, and I hope it looks good on the car when it's down. I think it's really going to, and I'm so excited for that to happen. I cannot wait. So what I'm doing is I'm just going through all the boxes, I'm pulling out all the paperwork, the stickers, and I'm going to grab, in that box there is the valve stem, which I just showed you, and there is a cap that goes over the axle and just is the center cap for the rim. So I'm pulling all those out and making sure it only goes with the valve stem, because it doesn't, the rest of the stuff doesn't need to go with it, and less chance of it getting lost. So just getting everything all taped up and prepped and, ready to go. Yeah, I just love how that rim looks in there with that big rotor and the nice caliper. Oh, it just looks so beautiful. I can't wait to see it with tires on it. Alright, so one of the things I have to do to get the engine running is get some rad hoses on this. So what I'm doing right now is this is like, I don't know, in the evening, I'm getting ready to order some parts. So I'm just very quickly putting the rad in the car so I can figure out what parts I want to buy. Because I'm doing a 20 AN on the top. 20 AN rad hose on the top, and it's fairly expensive, so doing a little bit of planning to get the fittings figured out ahead of time will help quite a bit. So I'm going to do a 90-degree off that thermostat housing into, I think, like either a 60 or a 45 into the rad. And yeah, so I'm just taking out my angle finder and kind of getting a rough idea as to what I want. Alright, so right now what I'm doing is just very quickly, I need to pull this wheel off of the passenger side. I want to put the caliper back on, and then I want to check the clearance of my new rim around the caliper, just to make sure that I can get the hidden wheel weights. So if you look at this tire right at the bottom, you see this ugly wheel weight on it. It's just kind of sticking out. It's ugly. So I want to go with inside wheel weights so it's more hidden, and I just want to make sure there's plenty of clearance around the caliper and the rim, so when I put this tire on and I start going down the road, the wheel weights don't hit the caliper and shear off, and then my wheel's out of balance and possibly damage the caliper and stuff like that. So putting the wheel on and just confirming there is tons of room between the caliper and the wheel. No issues there. So just quickly pull the caliper off, pull that wheel off, put the old or the temporary wheel back on so I can put it back down onto the wheel crib. All right, so this box is our new radiator parts. So I actually got these parts in Canada, so shipping was fairly quick. And so that is the -20 AN upper rad hose. These are some of the -20 fittings. I'm just doing a very quick look at this just to see if it's going to fit as I hoped it would. It kind of does, but the rod for the alternator actually comes into contact with the thermostat housing, so I'll have to figure something out. But there we have the -20 AN aluminum weld-on bung, and we're just gonna throw a fitting on that, throw it on the bung, and yeah, I mean, I think this is gonna work. So in the box I also got some new hose clamps. So I now have a hose clamp for the throttle body. So that's super nice. Super nice clamp. I really like them. A little bit nicer than the other clamps that I'd bought from a different company. So I might go back and buy some more of these ones that I like, just so that all the clamps are the same throughout the entire build. But I'll worry about that later. So I just really quickly want to check and make sure that the belt is still going to, fit properly and not interfere with the upper rad hose. We're good there as well. No stress. I should have enough clearance once the belt's tensioned properly. Fingers crossed. Alright, with the test fitting done, all that there's left to do is do a little bit of cleanup because I need access to my fab table. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to cut the old inlet off of the top of the rad. So with an aluminum cutting disc, very quick and easy. Start cutting the first side, get the sides cut, and then I realized that there's no good way to get in there to get the other, or the back half of the cut. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do the 6 bolts that hold the fans onto the rad, take them out, and then I have access to the other side of the what is that, spout, barb, I don't know, the other half, back access to the back half of the inlet. Alright, so the -20 AN weld-on bung is a fair bit larger than the hole that is just cut. So next thing I'm going to do is, with a flap disc, I'm just going to grind down a whole bunch of the old weld so that I have good, clean, fresh, solid surface to weld to. And since I need to open that hole up a fair amount, I have a sanding drum on my drill. I'm just using that to open up the aluminum. It's fairly soft, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a very slow process. It takes a lot of effort to not get a lot of openness. So I'm just quickly checking like the size just to see how much more I need. I need a fair amount. After a whole bunch of dicking around with that drum sander, I finally pulled my head out of my ass and just grabbed my big bit that will allow me to open up holes very quickly, very efficiently, and within 10 seconds it was done. I mean, I should have just done that from the start, but I don't know why I didn't. I kind of thought that the drum sander would, you know, sand the aluminum a lot quicker than it did. But anyways, here we are. So I'm just using a vacuum just to pull all of the chips out of the rad. I don't want the rad plugged. I don't want those chips going through the water pump. So just doing my best to clean up as I go. And with that, that bung sits in there very nicely. So before I actually start welding, I'm going to clean up my fab table a little bit. There's some tape melted to it. Some of the coating is just really bad. So I'm just going to take a wire wheel and I'm just going to clean up the surface of it so that, you know, when I put something on it, it gets a nice contact with the table. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a little bit of practice welding. It's been a long time since I welded aluminum. The last things I tried to weld didn't go so great, so I figure what the hell. I'll take a couple of scrap pieces of aluminum and I will just do a little bit of welding on them just to, get the hang of it again. So I got a couple of tacks on there, so I'm just going to do the first fillet weld, and it welded. Material, stuck together. It looks decent. I mean, the weld itself doesn't look great, but I think it's going to hold. I look on the back side, looks like I got decent penetration. There's really nothing wrong with it per se. I'm just not overly happy with the profile. And then when I try and weld flat, it just does not want to weld properly, and I'm not entirely sure why. Yeah, the flat welding just kind of sucked, so grab a couple more coupons. We're going to do a little bit of practice and, just checking some of the settings. And yeah, what I do here is kind of the same thing. My fillet weld, again, it doesn't look great, but it welds. The material's fusing together. And then what I do here is I stop and I'm like, you know what? I got another type of filler material, so I'm going to try it. So that was 4043 I was welding with. I'm like, okay, I'm going to switch over to 5356 and just see if it's any better. And yeah, as it turns out, the 5356 welded a fair bit better. So I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to weld with. And I am not a great welder when it comes to out of position welding and like awkward positions, but I'm gonna do this and we'll see how it goes. Throughout this process, I dip my tungsten a whole ton. I have to grind a bunch of tungsten a lot, and it was just a slow and kind of frustrating process. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So the weld right here on the back side of this bung is really hard because it's, you know, super tight clearance between the radiator fins and the back of the bung and then the wall of the radiator. And you combine all those things with the fact I'm really not that great of a welder, and this just becomes really difficult. It's a very hard to get in area, and you know, I'm doing my best, and I'm just praying that this holds and it works. right, well, it's done, I guess. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go have lunch with my wife, but before I head out, I'm going to kind of prop the radiator up in such a way that I can fill it up with some water and get some water just sitting in that dash 20 AN fitting. And of course I spill water all over the place, so that's just gonna make this a little bit harder, but I get, because if there's any residual water when I come back from lunch, I'm gonna be like, shit, this thing is leaking. But yeah, so I'm just gonna very quickly clean this all up, dry it off, and then we're just gonna leave it for an hour and see what happens. All right, so I'm back from lunch, and there was not a single drop that made it through the weld. That does not mean that it's going to hold up under pressure, but at the very least, no water leaked out of any cracks. And water is very good at finding the smallest crack to fit through, so I think I'll be okay. Hopefully, I don't run into any problems when I fill this up and start getting it heated, and there's a little bit of pressure in there, but, we'll see. I think I got it. So next up, I'm just going to put the rad back in the car with a couple of bolts. And from there, we are going to start making the upper radiator hose. So I'm just test fitting the fitting now that I've got the bung on there and it's super close to the radiator, because before with the old inlet it stuck out like an inch. But yeah, so just trying to get this fitting on, and I noticed that it wasn't sinking all the way down. And what had happened is, I guess as I was welding, the arc wandered at some point in time and it actually hit the threads and melted the threads a little bit. I don't know when that would have happened, but it did, because yeah, the threads are damaged. So I'm just taking a file and just kind of cleaning them up. Alright, so now that fitting threads down all the way, you have seen me build hoses before, so there's really not going to be too terribly much to say, except when I run into a small snag. So I'll talk then. Right, I forgot. I do not have AN wrenches, so aluminum wrenches large enough for -20 AN. So what I'm doing is I'm covering the jaws of these steel, or of the steel crescent wrench, with electrical tape. What that's going to do is provide like a soft, malleable surface, so that while I'm tightening down on the fitting, I don't have the really, really hard steel directly against the soft aluminum fitting and marking it and, destroying it. This is a trick I learned a long time ago, and for one or two fittings, it works fairly well. If I was doing like the fuel system, I would never do it this way, just because you have to replace the tape frequently, and it's just, I'd rather have the proper tools, if I'm doing the job a lot. But yeah, for this size fitting, there just really isn't much, so I didn't really feel like spending a lot of money for 2 fittings.
Let's go.
Alright, so on this second fitting, as I start tightening the fitting down into the collar, the hose actually starts rotating, and I am not able to grip the hose and stop it from rotating. So what I just did there is I put a little piece of tape right under the bottom fitting, because as I'm tightening this and as the hose starts rotating, I want to see if it's pushing that hose out. And right here, as I can't stop it from rotating, it does. It actually starts pushing the hose out. So at that point in time, I stop and I completely pull the fitting back apart, because that is not good. If that's pushing the hose out, it means it's not going to have a good fit. It's going to leak. So undo the fitting, pull it back out, add a little bit more lubrication to the inside of the hose so that that fitting hopefully doesn't move, and push that hose all the way back up, and we'll try this again, and hopefully this time it works. So yeah, second time around goes no problem. So now let's take this over to the car and get it on, see if it fits. Yeah, I mean, it definitely fits, but I didn't think this through. Right now, the upper rad hose is way above the fill cap. So that means that bleeding it's potentially gonna make bleeding the system a lot harder because the highest point is above the fill cap. So it's gonna be very easy for air bubbles to get trapped in that upper radiator hose. So at this point in time, I'm gonna run with it and we're gonna run the car and see. But I'm probably gonna end up buying a new thermostat housing that is straight out, and then I'll run the hose underneath the alternator tensioner and just run it straight into the rad. So that piece of hose there, I'm just checking to see if I'm gonna have enough so that I can get the straight out thermostat housing and make it fit. But you know what, for right now, just for a shakedown cruise, that hose is sufficient. I'll live with it. So the last hose that I need for the upper cooling system is a little bypass hose that goes between the thermostat housing and the water pump. So originally I had a 6AN orb to -6AN fitting on the thermostat housing, but with the space that there is in that area, there's just not enough space to get -6AN fittings in there unless I were to like loop it under the alternator and back up. And that probably wouldn't be the end of the world, so that may still end up happening. It's not as aesthetically pleasing. My hope is to just get a line on it straight from the thermostat right into the water pump and not have to do that, but we'll see how this goes. So I've got two barbs. I've got one for the thermostat housing and I've got one for the water pump. And as I'm going to put this together, I noticed that one of the barbs is much thicker than the other one. And so I measured the outsides, and the outsides are different diameters, but I measured the inside and the insides are the same. It's like, okay, I can hopefully make this work. So throw both fittings on, throw it in the thermostat housing and on the water pump, tighten it down. So I grabbed a little bit of hose out of the car. I think I grabbed -8, and before I tried doing much, I measured the inside and I was like, oh crap, this is way too small. There's no way that's going to fit over the outside. So I grabbed a chunk of -10 line. And I look at this and I was like, okay, that -10 fits over the barb in the water pump, no problem. With a little bit of force, it does go over the barb on the thermostat housing. So I'm like, okay, I think I can make this work. As I said, -AN fittings aren't going to work in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up, I have just these little like fake -AN covers, but they're just hose clamps underneath. They kind of look like AN fittings from the top, but they're not. It's kind of hokey, but it from 10 feet away it looks fine. So right on the radiator there, on the top of it, that's what the fitting is. So I get the fitting pushed onto one side, and then I go to push the fitting onto the other side, which is the side that I originally had on the thermostat barb. And I have a hell of a time trying to get this on there. And at the end of the day, because it stretched so much getting pushed onto the thermostat housing, it just does not go on. And it's so frustrating because it's just stretched out a little bit. It's just like some fabric nylon. It's catching, and it just will not fit on. So what do? Chop up another piece and try again. All right, so at least with a fresh piece, I'm able to get those ends onto both sides of the hose. I'm just gonna grab my air chuck, blow it out a little bit, get all the particles out of it. Don't need that shit flying through the cooling system. And go to put it on, and fuck, the end of the hose is too small for the thermostat housing barb, but it works perfectly fine for the one on the water pump. So, okay, well, let's go over to the bench and we'll open up the end of it. You know, we have the tools, we can make holes bigger, because that's what we do. Now that the hole's been enlarged, very quick test, just make sure it goes on to that, or it'll go over that fitting, and it does. All right, so put it back on the hose end, and we're gonna try and get this thing installed. And because the hose has to expand so much, no matter how much WD-40 I put on there, it does not go on. So coupled with the fact the bottle that has my WD-40 is broken, this is just not going on. I'm getting super pissed off right now. This is the most pissed off I've been on this car. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I get super mad and I fucking throw that thing. I hit my wheel box, put a dent in the box. I don't care. I didn't hit the rim. I just dented the box. And yeah, so I'm just super pissed off with it. So I go get it. I try a couple other things, and you know, the definition of insanity. I try again and it doesn't work again. So I throw it again, and after all that I walked away from this. You know, watching this back, I'm still super frustrated by this situation, but, and you know, it's not a great place to end the video, but we will get it figured out. So if you stuck around this long, as always, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.